For over 90 years, we've been crash testing our cars in the tireless pursuit of automotive safety. At Volvo, safety's been first since 1927. We've saved millions of lives with the invention of the three-point seatbelt in 1959. At Volvo, we've made driving safer. For you and them. Visit safety.finleyvolvo.com to learn more.
Welcome to the Kelly Cardenas podcast, where attitude is everything. We want to thank the Private Money Club and Money School with Chris Nagel. You guys can check them on out at chrisnagel.com. Our sponsors have been so amazing, and it's exactly what the episode is today. The reason why we have the sponsors is because of the relationships that we have. Chris Nagel has been such an incredible individual in my life. Jim DiGiulio, who's the owner of Finley Volvo Cars of Las Vegas. The service that they give, the relationships that they have, has been the best thing that I can imagine, and the fact that they've supported the podcast has been incredible. I want to thank every one of you out there that's listening for helping us to get in the top 1% globally as far as all podcasts. And it goes right in line. My guest today, it's such an honor. We got a chance to meet probably about 3 years ago. It was at a pivotal time in my life, which I don't think that she understood it at that time. But the impact that she has on people is so amazing, because she's always, every room that I've ever been in with her, she's always the largest person in the room, but she allows herself to be small to make everyone else seem big. She doesn't talk about herself as this huge leader. She talks about herself as a learner, and she's constantly learning. And that's why I believe that she's one of the greatest servant leaders, and not only that, but one of the best speakers and consultants in this world, that every single company out there that's looking to help and inspire their community, to work with their business leaders, to work with leadership development, diversity, equity, inclusion, accesses and belonging, antiracism, facilitation, board development, strategic planning, volunteers, resource development. Any of those things that I just listed, if you're looking to increase those, I believe there's only one answer, and that one answer is here with us today, which is, she didn't even want a title, but I'm going to give her a title because I think that she's one of the best speakers I've ever seen in my life, and one of the best at what she does as far as being a servant leader, and not only in word, but in action. So please welcome Miss Vicki Clark to the show.
Oh, thank you, Kelly. Oh my gosh. When you reeled all that off, that made me remember how old I am and how many jobs I've had. So,
well, you're reigning from Memphis, and I want to I got a chance to spend time in my professional career started in Memphis, Tennessee, and we connected on that level. Can you take us, because there's so many different subjects that we're going to be able to hit today. And you told me there's nothing off limits. And we were talking about some current things that are going on right away that just happened in Nashville. I would like to start there, and then we're going to backtrack, because I want to know the history of Vicki. But how are you feeling about how are you feeling in your view on what has transpired politically there in Nashville?
Well, what happened in Nashville a few days ago is that my state representative, Justin Pearson, was expelled. And he was expelled from the state house along with another young man from Nashville and a woman named Gloria Johnson, who's from Knoxville, who was not expelled because she made it through by one vote. The two Justins happen to be young African-American men, and Gloria Johnson is a 60-year-old white woman, but she is such an ally. And for the first time, I think since I was a little girl during the civil rights movement, I grew up here in Memphis. I live 15 minutes. I live in the house I grew up in. So I live 15 minutes from where Dr. King was killed. And for the first time, I think since then, I felt like I didn't have a voice when they voted him out of the state house. And it took me back to places that I don't want to go, but I realized that that's where we are. So it's been interesting. The good news is, and I really believe that out of everything that seems bad or negative, some good things happen. And those young men, their cause, their advocacy, their passion has now been elevated worldwide. And they didn't have to pay a marketing agent. They just had to deal with certain people in the State House in Nashville.
So, Vicki, my mom taught me very early on and often that perspective was everything. And when she explained to me perspective, she helped me to understand that perspective was nothing more than from the vantage point which you saw something. And if you could go to the vantage point which the person that you're with, if you could look at it from their viewpoint, you would see a different object. Can you take us to your perspective? Because a lot of people, when you just said, it took me back to a place that I didn't want to go. There's a lot of women out there that are listening that are not African-American women, that did not grow up in the civil rights movement, did not grow up 15 minutes from where Dr. King was taken. Can you help us to understand that perspective and how you actually felt during that? Because a lot of people turned that story on and then they turned it off thinking that, okay, well, it's just another thing in politics, but it meant a little something different to you.
Well, it took me back to the 60s when they were trying to get people to, register to vote. And I didn't, I was a kid. I didn't realize, okay, so people can't vote. Why don't they want people to vote? My family told me about when they had these poll tax, so they would make people count how many jars in beans in a jar, or recite the Constitution in order to vote. I mean, just crazy stuff. And I also remember being downtown with my mother shopping, and I saw those two water fountains. And one said white and one said colored. And I remember saying to my mother, I was a little girl, and I said, I'm thirsty. I want some water. Now, everybody needs to understand, if you're not a boomer, there was no bottled water. So they're, like, well, why didn't they just pull bottled water out of their backpack? We didn't have no backpacks, and there wasn't no bottled water. And there were these two fountains. And I said to my mom, I'm thirsty. And she said, we'll get water when we get home. And I said, but there's water fountains right there. And she said, See, my mother she didn't tolerate it. She wasn't going to say, okay, you can only drink out of this one because you can't drink out of that one. And I said, why can't I get water? Well, in the 50s, you didn't question your mother but once. That was the end of that. And, she goes, well, get water when we get home. I'm like, okay. So when I came home, I had to be about 8. And I said to her, why couldn't we get water? And then she said, did you see those two water fountains? And I said, yeah, I thought that's so more people could get water. And she knew that I could read by the time I was 8. And she said, what did one of them say? I said, one said colored and one said white. And I said, so it was Kool-Aid coming out of that other one, right? The one for colored. And she said, no. And then she explained. And I thought, that doesn't make any sense. And she said, no, it doesn't. So this idea of empathy and looking at something from someone's point of view, rather than saying, why are you so sensitive about that? Or don't be so thin-skinned, and all the things that we do to erase away things that we don't understand. So that's how I grew up. I also remember the Sunday morning, and a friend of mine has written a wonderful book about the Birmingham bombings, the 4 little girls who were killed in the Birmingham church bombing. And one of them was her sister. And she was not born yet. She was born after Denise was killed. Denise was exactly my age. And we were getting ready to go to church one Sunday morning, and we had the radio on. And they talked about that a church had been bombed in Birmingham, and some little girls were killed, and it was in the basement. And I started crying, saying I didn't want to go to church because my Sunday school was in the basement. And I was scared, and suppose they would kill me. And again, my mother said, we're not afraid. We're going to church. You need to go get your clothes on because we're going to church. And we don't live in fear. And it was only about 2 years ago, since COVID, that I met Denise McNair's sister, Lisa McNair, who never knew her sister. But she has written an amazing book. I think it's called Letters to Denise. And the idea that Denise McNair and I were exactly the same age. I learned a lot about Denise from, interviewing Lisa and being friends with Lisa. But those are the things that happened when I was a kid. And I didn't have a bad life. Don't get me wrong. I went to a segregated school. Now, a lot of people go, oh, that's too bad. No, I really had a great education. And everything that I got from my grade school and my high school. I had wonderful teachers. Okay, I may have gotten a secondhand book from some girl named, from some girl named Stephanie from some other school, but that's okay. I just scratched Stephanie's name out and put my name on the book. Um, but we were taught. They were teaching us how to be people. Yeah, we learned Shakespeare and we learned how to write and we learned all of those things. In fact, we had a very rigorous education because those teachers knew that that's what we were going to need. You know, we read Shakespeare out loud. We read, books. Theodore Dreiser books. I mean, it was amazing when I look now at specifically because that was my thing, reading and literature and all of that. It's like, wow, were exposed to so much. And in 1963, a busload of us went to the World's Fair in New York. 5 teachers got together. We made the newspaper. Negro kids go to New York. Yes, that was a great banner. Negro kids go to New York. But there were 5 teachers who were determined to expose us to things. Oh, we sold candy. We sold pickles. Who knows what we didn't do. And at that time, it was $75. You know how much that money that is for a working class family?
Oh my gosh.
In 1963, I was in the 8th grade. I had never been away from my parents overnight or anything like that. And they took us, we went all the way up. We started with Nashville was our first stop. Then we went to Mount Vernon. We went to the Hermitage. We went all the way up. We went to New York. That was the year that the World's Fair, and I can still hear It's a Small World After All in my head, the big stratosphere thing. And we went all the way up to Niagara Falls. So when I tell you that I went to a segregated school, I don't want you to feel sorry for me. Those were the kind of opportunities that I had. Now, of course, they said to us, which is very stressful, you are representing at that time every Negro person who has ever lived or who will ever live. Not only are you representing your family, you're representing your city, you're representing every Negro person that ever lived. That's a lot of stress for an 8th grader. But the whole idea was you got to look right, you got to act right. And at that time, teachers could say to you, so don't act a fool. And, but it was amazing. We went on a bus. I think it took about 12 days. We stayed in hotels. We went to the Automat. We couldn't even stay in hotels in our own city. But we stayed in hotels, on the way. And went to the Automat in New York and, went to Washington, D.C. and saw everything and saw a play at Ford's Theater and walked to the top of the Washington Monument. So when I got an opportunity to work in Washington some years ago, I was like, wow, I was here in the 8th grade.
Well, what I hear about a lot of times is that you could take the exact same seed, right, and you could plant it in rocky soil. You could do it in just on concrete, but when you put it in the right soil, that's when the plant flourishes. And you were talking about earlier as far as how your mom kind of prepared the soil, and you used a word that your mom was fierce before fierce was fierce. Can you explain like some of that? Because I think that it helps for us to understand the context and who Vicki is by how you were raised, what you were raised in, and how incredible your mom was during this process.
Well, my mom and my dad were incredible. They were incredible on 2 ends of the spectrum. And the more that I understand about what Black men have had to face, I understand why my dad was how he was. He was much more tempered than she was. She was fiery. And you can do anything you want to. Don't let anybody hold you back. Don't let anybody tell you that you're less than. I grew up in a very loving, I'm an only child. I had, grandparents and all that. And my father was much more measured. And again, the older I get, I understand why they were where they were. Because my father couldn't afford to be fierce because he probably would not have survived. I'm just going to be honest with you. Because that was the way, Black men had to be at that time. My mother didn't care. She said something to me one time like, there's a lot worth going to jail for, and I'm willing to do it. And I was like, whoa, you know, and you're a little kid and you're like, are you really going to jail? You know, she was a school secretary. And again, they transferred the books from the white schools to then the Negro schools. And she was talking to the white secretary on the phone. And they were phone friends, if you will, as much as you could be in the 60s. And the woman said, I have to go. I'm going to a secretary's meeting. And my mom said, secretary's meeting? And the woman said, yes, we have a secretary's association. My mom was like, oh, what do you do? She goes, we exchange ideas. We talk about how we keep records and, you know, all this. It's very nice. So there was no thought that at that time, Negro secretaries would even be to get into that. So my mom and her friends sat at the dining room table that is still in that room in there and wrote out and typed out a petition to the school board and the school superintendent to begin the Negro School Secretaries Association. And everybody said to her and her three friends, and she had fierce friends, don't do this. You're going to lose your job. You know, the principal of the school she worked for, that lady was like, Miss Floyd, please don't do this. You're going to hurt the school. My dad was like, you know, your mama might lose her job, you know. And she was like, no, all they can say is no. And they wrote up this beautiful petition. They typed it all up. They got all dressed up with their hats and their gloves and their stockings, you know, like people used to. And they went over to the Board of Education and presented their petition. Now you say, why would people have to do all of this just to gather some folks? It wasn't going to cost any money, but that was what they had to do. And so the Negro School Secretaries Association of Memphis City Schools was formed. And I was going through some old stuff the other day, and I actually found my mother had a beautiful handwriting, but that's who she was. And my father, again, understanding now, and I have two sons, and I have a grandson. My sons are adults, of course. But when I understand now the jeopardy that men of color are in, it's scary. My friends say my father worked all the time. He basically had 3 jobs. And on Sundays, he would put real estate signs out for a realty company. And we would go into neighborhoods that, you know, I'd never seen before.
Yeah.
And he, putting, the sign is sold, for sale, whatever. He would check the houses and all that. And he would take me with him. He would mostly do it on Sunday afternoons. I always wondered why my mother didn't go. I just thought it was, so he and I could spend some time together. And we were in a yard. I was just skipping around playing. And this woman came out of the house next door. The houses weren't close together because these were large, beautiful houses. And my father at that point had to be about, 37. And she said, boy, what you doing over there? First of all, I had never heard anybody refer to my father as a boy. She said, boy, what you doing over there? And she said it twice. And my father looked up. He was wearing a cap. He tipped his cap. And he said, ma'am, I'm representing XXY Realty Company and Mr. So-and-so, so-and-so, and she just looked. And what I didn't realize is that my dad had a letter signed by the realtor in his pocket because if he was questioned. And so he took the letter out of his pocket and started to take 2 steps toward her house. And she did like this. She just did like that. Well, y'all just finish what you're doing over there and get on away. And my dad didn't carry a lot of anger. My mom had a lot of anger. But I remember his countenance changing. So I'm skipping around. And then she said to me, which I had never heard their term, Gail, who's that man you with? First of all, no one had ever called me Gail. And I didn't know she was talking to me. She says, who's that man you with? And I said, that's my daddy. And she said, are you sure? My parents were both very dark skinned. And I've been very fair all my life. And when she questioned that, I said, of course, it's my daddy. And I remember that at that point, my dad put the tools and the signs. We got in the car and we left. And he didn't talk all the way home. And I said, I don't know what's going on. And he just wouldn't talk. And I made the mistake of telling my mother what happened. She went ballistic. She went ballistic. And she said, we don't need the money that bad. Nobody, that's insulting. And I kept saying, why didn't she think that he was my daddy? And that was when they both explained colorism to me. That darker skinned people in any ethnicity, we know now, are thought of as more inferior. And then, of course, they start talking to me about, genetics and people come out looking different and all of that. But that was an experience. And again, the way my dad handled it was the way he had to handle it. Because who knows what would have happened if he had been a firebrand. And I think now as an adult, I think he was insulted because it happened in front of his daughter. And just the way this woman was talking to him and the way, putting your hand up, like, don't come near me, and my dad was, ma'am, and this and that and that. And my mom said, that's why I don't go, because I knew this was going to happen. And she said, we'd all be in jail now if that had happened and I was there. I was like, why is she always talking about going to jail? But I do understand the difference in what would have happened to a Black man in that time, which would have been in the late 50s or the early 60s, and a Black woman. So I had both ends.
Vicki, how were you able to, you've taken this experience that you have, and you've turned it into, you are such a voice for leadership, and not just in a black and white sense. I've watched you move a room and get people to realize that if you're from the East Coast and you're from the South, you didn't grow up in the exact same culture. So seeing that's going to help you to be able to lead. How were you able to navigate? Because that could have made someone very angry. That could have made somebody, but you used it to help everyone else to see from different perspectives, not just from yours. How were you able to do that?
I think I adapted more to my dad's strategy than my mom's. Now, I will tell you this. The older I get, her name was Freddie. I'm turning into Freddie. I'm becoming Freddie. She's in here. But I think I adapted my dad's kind of point of view on it, and the way to deal with things. And I'm like you, I'm a relational person. I like people. I want to know about people. I don't write people off, those types of things. And so that was kind of how, I use that. I've also understood what it's like to be the only in a room. The only woman, the only Black person, the only person from the South. In my first job in St. Louis, oh yeah, that's very north, at a publishing company, they told me, you need to do something with it. If you're going to be successful here, now this is coaching. This was coaching then. If you're going to be successful here, you need to do something with that hair. You need to drop the Southern accent, because, if you have a Southern accent, you're stupid. Your IQ goes down. You need to not wear light colors and, florals, because that's too girly, and people won't think you're professional. Okay. You need to not put pictures of your family up, because they won't think that you're a professional. And you don't act too Black. I don't know who I was supposed to be. I was supposed to be Casper. Casper the ghost. I wasn't supposed to be me. So this idea of having to assimilate, which I did not know that term then, but having to fit into a place that this is the only way you are going to be accepted and successful, it is stressful. And now they say that it is actually trauma. And that was why I was very happy, believe it or not, when they started integrating schools here, that I was not sent to one of those. My mom said, they're not ready. She worked in the school system. She said, they're not ready. And so some of my friends who were sent, bused, if you will, to other schools that were fun, they had no lives. And see, they bust the best and the brightest. So these were kids who were in clubs, who were in sports, who were in plays, and who went to parties. Those kids, they got nothing in those schools. They would never call on them, anything. So I was glad that my mom stood firm on that. But I have experienced that in the workplace. I've experienced in conference rooms, And you just, and that's why I think I have empathy for other people. Like right now, I mean, in June, I'll be 72 years old. Uh, I am a big ally for young people. And boomers love to rag on young people. Why don't they do this? Why don't they do that? And I'm like, come on. I got a picture of you with a skirt on that's so short, so don't start telling me about young people, you know. And I remember when you did this. Now, I don't know how you get old, you turn into church people. I don't know, but I feel that I'm an ally for young people. I consider myself heterosexual. I'm an ally for LGBTQ people. I just try to be an ally for other people who are not like me, but I learn more from them. I can learn so much, from them. And that's how I kind of approach things.
So when you're teaching servant leadership and leadership, this is the reason why, I mean, when you're listening to you, this is the reason why I say that I believe that you're the best servant leader I've ever experienced, because you don't come from a sense of, when I've got to see you speak, which if you get a chance to see her speak, right now it's going to be virtual. But if you get the opportunity, or you get the opportunity to have Vicki in your company, it will blow your mind, because she's not standing on a hill telling you, you need to do it like this. She's making everyone in the whole entire audience almost voice their side. And then she's saying, oh, wow, okay, I see it. I see it. Teach me. I don't understand how you do this, Vicki, because most of the time, the people in your space, the speakers, the consultants, they just roll in and want to tell people what to do. But you can you help a person to understand how to do that in their company and organization?
First of all, you have to want to be a servant leader and not a boss. You have to want, you also have to be really authentic. I mean, you've heard me stand up in front of groups and say at everything. You remember the one time we were together, I looked out at the sponsors and I thought, well, this is my last time coming here. They're going to dump me. But you just have to be authentic, and you have to be able to put yourself and give of yourself, and to make sure that people know, they don't need to fear anything from me. And that's something that I guess I've had to work. I realize because when you talk about, especially the work with diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, and access, oh, old Black woman, Memphis, ooh, she gonna blast us. She gonna call us out. That's not who I am. That's not who I am. I start off with very simple things. I'm left-handed. Most people are right-handed. The world was not designed for left-handed people. Think about that. So when you start talking about something as benign as left hand and right hand, I talk about all the things that I was never trained to do, because at that time there were no left-handed scissors and all that kind of stuff. And then people are like, oh, like why I can't open jars, I don't do tools, I never learned how to sew or anything, because that's what left-handed, the world was not designed for us. Everything was designed for right-handed people. When computers came out, they finally figured out to tell you to switch the mouse, because they was designed for right-handed people. That's why I love the pads. So if you're right-handed, you never think about that. That means that you have right-handed privilege. And people are so antsy now, talk about privilege. I think we are gone into the privilege war. People want to tell you how poor they were, how they didn't have a one pair of shoes, all that. That's not what privilege is. We're talking about systems. We're talking about systems and structures. We're not talking about who was, I call it the privilege Olympics. People want to show you that they had no privilege. We all have some privilege. Some people have had more privilege than others, but you have to understand what privilege is. I did some virtual presentation for a bar association. I love working with bar associations. And for whatever reason, this retired judge was part. Again, I think people were bored to death during COVID. This man was like 74. I mean, I didn't know him. You got all the little pixels, and asked, so what do you think about all this? We're talking about it. And evidently they all revered him. He seemed like a nice enough man. And he said, I'm so glad I tuned in. I was like, okay, this is good. And he said, because up until tonight, I didn't really understand privilege. Now, the ego in me went, oh, wow, that's so great that the 74-year-old retired judge now understands privilege. The human in me said, oh my gosh, this man has been making decisions about people's lives for 50 years, and he didn't understand privilege. He didn't understand it. So while I was happy that he finally came to it, I'm like, how many people have been sentenced to longer sentences? How many people have been disrespected? How many people have been misjudged because he didn't really understand the concept of privilege? So it was a bittersweet moment.
How can a person today start to really, I mean, the left-handed thing when you're talking about that, I was sitting and I was just sinking into my chair thinking, like, I'm right-handed and the world was made. I mean, honestly, like when you said turning the jar, at first I was like, you can't turn a jar, Vicki? But I think about it and I was saying in my head, righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. But where can a person start, right? So there's so many systems in companies, right? And in organizations all over the world that didn't think like, hey, I'm going to exclude somebody or I'm going to do this. But now once you become aware of it, what can they start to do like right now to start to impact that and start to change and be able to see people in a different light?
Own it. Own it. Stop excusing it. Stop hiding from it. Stop saying, but we're better than them, or this isn't really happening. I did some work during COVID with a for a year, the first year of COVID, with a large pharmaceutical company with all of their supervisors and managers. And the first thing the HR person said when we were having kind of the pre-call to get up, she said, they're not going to want to do this. She said, because somebody's already said, why are we talking about this at work? And there's a book out there that's called Why Are We Talking About This at Work? And I actually got the book, and it was, why are we talking about this at work? Because people bring their whole selves to work, and companies need to own it, and they need to be honest. When we look back at all the companies that put a black box up when Mr. George Floyd was killed, or something when Breonna Taylor was killed, or something like that, what have they done now? Be serious about it. The other thing is we have to understand that it takes time. It takes time, but you have to be serious about it. This group that we were working with, they went so far as to put the diversity pieces and the really cultural competency. We're all diverse. We're all different. Okay, we check that box. But the cultural competency, if you're going to be a leader, whether you're a supervisor, a manager, a mother, a father, it doesn't matter whether you work inside the home, outside the home, you have to understand cultural competency, and you have to understand where you are on the cultural competency. Like I said, I cheered for the Cowboys. I grew up in the 50s and the 60s, and I'd go to the movies and watch the Westerns, and I was cheering for the Cowboys. I'm very ashamed of that now, because now that in the past 3 years, I've been studying more about Indigenous people, and I know better. I know better now. And I start every session that I do with a land acknowledgement to the Indigenous people on that land of whoever the group is, or mine. A group that we're going to be working with tomorrow, I'm going to do the land acknowledgement for Louisville because of the shooting there yesterday. And so the idea is to continue to grow in your cultural competency. And so what this company did was, this has now been put as part of supervisors, managers, and directors. This is part of their performance appraisals. Wow. So they're serious. They're serious about it. And I'll tell you why. Because the Z's, the younger people who are coming up, they interview a company. They say, tell me about your diversity plan. Tell me about your inclusion. I looked on the internet and I saw what you put out there after Mr. Floyd was killed, and I saw what you put out there after Breonna Taylor was killed. I haven't seen anything since. And the Z's don't want to work or join groups or spend their money in places that don't have their values. And there's this wonderful crop of Z and young millennial allies of all races who they hold it near. They hold it near like people did in the 60s. It's real to them. People quit jobs because not what happened to them, because what happened to somebody else. Because the company, years ago, I remember people were divesting their money from South Africa because people were getting, this is the movement that's starting again. And it's just so wonderful, to see it. So that's why companies need to be serious about this. Don't the lip service and we're going to elevate our diversity. Oh, and having a diversity officer, but they have no budget and they have no staff. And they're just supposed to put on 3 trainings a year and do the observance days, Black History Month and Women's History Month and all that kind of, that's not, that's performative. That's performative. And a lot of it is not being defensive and just hearing what people are telling you. And yeah, it can hurt. But that's the only way it's going to happen.
What is something right now? Like I just had this experience. My best friend is named Will, so we've been best friends since 4th grade. He called me the other day and he said I had a challenge. I said, "What's the challenge?" He said he went to stop by his buddy's house. He lives in a predominantly white area, and he happens to not be white. And he went down the street, and his buddy had a statue, and it was like a 6-foot statue, and it had a saxophone, and it was big bugged eyes. And it was a black man, but it wasn't a skin tone of a black man. It was just like jet black face. And my friend looks at this and he's like, at first he said he was wondering, should I say something to this guy? And
that is always, if you are the minority in the group, whether you're a woman, whatever it is, the first thing is, should I say something?
Mm-hmm.
That's the first thing that comes to your mind. Should I say something?
Well, he said, and he did. He said something, and he asked. He's like, "So, man, this is his friend." He's like, "What's up with this?" And and the guy turns. He happens to be a white man. He turns, and he's like, "Oh, that's we play fantasy football, and every year, whoever loses has to display that statue in their house for a year."
Get out of here! So the losers.
Yes. So. And when he explained this to my friend, who happens to be an African American man, my friend was like, I mean, you can imagine where this is going to go. Then another guy comes in who happens to be the guy who set up that would be the thing that if you lost and you had to have. This was the guy that walked in. And my friend said, "I got a problem." And he's like, "Why do you have a problem? It's no big deal. It's just a joke, blah, 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 blah." The reason why I'm saying this is because there's so many things that I believe that we're unaware of.
We are.
That really cause someone, like my friend Will, he really was at a point where, it really impacted him in a huge way. He told the person, Will doesn't pull any punches. He said, "This is the way it's going to go down. I'm either going to buy that thing from you because I'm going to smash it, and I'll give you good money for it." He said, so when he left, he said, "I'll give you 3 choices. 1, I'm going to take it. 2, I'm going to break it. 3, I'm going to paint it," because he's an artist and he was going to take it home and just paint it himself. Vicki, can you help people to understand some of the things that are normal in today's society that we are not seeing because the system sometimes was set up for a person that maybe didn't look like them?
First of all, when you said the loser gets to take, I went to the other side, so it was some amazing saxophone player, blues saxophone player. My head was going in another direction. So I always start on the high side, but that the loser gets it. And when you use the word normal is what's normal in your culture. So what's normal for you is not necessarily normal for me. And if we're going to be friends, there's a respect piece here. And you may not understand it because you've maybe never been confronted with anything, But when you talk to someone and say, okay, wait a minute, you've made this giant black statue the loser. This is what losers get. What do you think that's saying to me? And I think those are the kinds of conversations we have to have. But sometimes when you're confronted with that thing, you do that's kind of stuff, you do get angry. And you know, and but people have to be willing to listen and not just go, why are you so sensitive and all of that. They needed to understand it from his point of view. And again, normal is what's normal for you. It's not necessarily what's normal for me. I'm sorry he had that experience, but I think that was such an opportunity for his friends, because once they understand that, they will be different in the workplace. They will be different with their families. They will be different in the world once they can see it. And this is not, please, let's not go into, oh, they're all just so politically correct. No, this is not politically correctness. This is about respect. Mm-hmm. This is about respect. This is about dignity. This is about empathy. This is about looking at things through somebody else's eyes. And you say, well, I don't really understand why that would upset you. Let me tell you why that would upset me. Mm. And I think if we can do it, and even if he got angry at first, but friends have a chance to come back and say, okay, now let's sit down and talk about this. Let me explain to you from my point of view. And if they're truly his friends, they will accept what he says. They may not still understand it, but they will accept it and they will begin to grow if they're really his friends.
Vicki, you hit on something just a couple of minutes ago. You talked about the cultural, what did you say, cultural competency?
Cultural competency,
okay.
Yeah.
So this hit me when you said that, because there was a time where I was at church and the pastor went into a verse that said that women need to stay silent, that they don't need to speak up, and they need to, if they have any questions, then they need to ask their man at home. And I could tell you you would have heard a pin drop, but it was a carpeted area. You would have heard the pin drop. And every woman and every man got tight.
Because they had to go home with those women.
Exactly. And then the guy said something. There was 3 things that he said. He said, number 1, you have to understand the content. Number 2, you have to understand the context. And number 3, you have to understand the culture of which where the people were. So to understand the content, the context, and the culture. And then he explained it. At that time, women were not educated to read, so they couldn't read. So their question would be more inflammatory in front of. So when they went to ask their husband, it wasn't like saying that you got to be, governed over. It was just the fact that when you get a chance to have a question, ask your man, who was the guy who was educated at the time. So in that culture, that's why it made sense at that time. And I was like, oh, he got himself out of something, because I thought he was going to get killed by all the women in the church. But when you said that, the cultural competency, it took me also to the professional beauty industry, which I got a chance to be in for 30 years. And a lot of times people would turn a blind eye saying that, oh, all hair is exactly the same. And I understood that point, but I understood very early on that there was cultural differences in the women that sat in my chair, which helped me to be able to communicate with them at that point. Can we stay on that cultural competency and how people can start to understand if they've never been in it? Because when I moved to Memphis the first time, I remember meeting a guy, and he was 30 years old, and he had never been to a black man's house. I also met a man who was 35 years old who had never been to a white person's house. This was weird for me growing up in the military, but
right.
When you don't have exposure, how can you become culturally competent?
And you're right, exposure. Like I said, I'm very lucky that my parents had friends of all kinds, which was very rare for that time. My family had gay friends, men. I don't know if they had any gay lady friends, but I don't know. But my parents had gay male friends. My father had a relationship with people who were white. My mother did too. And so the exposure of those types of things really help. But when you're not exposed and all you've ever seen is your little piece of the world, you have to go looking. That's why those Thursday night conversations called Let's Talk About It and Do Something. A lot of the people who came on to those were white people who said, I want to understand. And they would share their story. You know me, I love to make people feel comfortable. It wasn't a living room, but even on Zoom, it's like, you can talk here. You know, we're nobody's going to hold anything against you here. You're here because you want an experience. You're looking for something. And we want to help you get it, and we'll get something from you. And so you have to be willing. Like again, my own journey with the indigenous folks, there is a very, very, at that point, very upscale neighborhood here. I'll just call the name. It's called Chickasaw Gardens. It is the old upscale neighborhood. Well, when I learned that the Chickasaw were the indigenous people who inhabited this land, I almost fell out of my chair, because how dare you name a gated community Chickasaw Gardens? That makes your head explode. And there, of course, is the Chickasaw Gardens Country Club. And so the whole idea, I just learned that in the last 3 years. I mean, I always knew Chickasaw Gardens. In fact, the incident I told you about with my father, that's where we were. But the whole idea was that, so you take the name of the people that you took the land from, and you name a fancy neighborhood after it, and then name a country club that nobody can get into but old white money. I mean, they wouldn't even let Elvis in that club. I mean, this is when you talk about cultural competency, you're not just talking about race. There is classism, there is colorism. I mean, this stuff is that's why it's fascinating, but that's why it's also multifaceted. Elvis could not get into either one of the traditional country clubs here in Memphis. And so they started, some Jewish people, a friend of my father's and some other people started a club at that time called the Memphis Athletic Club, because none of them could get into any of the country clubs. And they didn't want it to be called a country club. They called it the Athletic Club. And again, my father's second job was he was a bartender. So he would do that at night. And these were, again, Jewish people and people who weren't old money. Now, Black people still couldn't go. But my father, a couple times a year, would call my mother on the phone and say, I probably won't be home till 5 o'clock in the morning because there's a special guest. And we learned, she came to realize that the club would close and Elvis and his buddies would come out and they would play handball and they would play pool and they would have drinks and they would, relax. But the club was closed. And he told a story of how some of the guys, the group sitting at the bar, there was 3 Black, bartenders, and they were telling crazy jokes. They were telling jokes with the N word in it and all that kind of stuff. Okay, at that time, they weren't going to speak up. Do you see the difference between what my mother experienced and my father experienced? Mm-hmm. He said they looked at each other, but they weren't going to say a word. And he said that Elvis walked over and said to them, what y'all doing? And they, we just talking. And he said, sound like to me y'all being real disrespectful to these men. He's calling them men. These men staying up all night. I won't tell you the rest of it because you get bleeped. Your sponsors wouldn't like it. For your blah, blah, blah. And here you sitting over here telling all these bad jokes. You apologize. My dad said they apologized. They said, oh, we're sorry. I said, don't apologize to me. Apologize to these men. And they, I'm sorry. And he came behind the bar, and he said he was sorry. He said, they don't know. He called them a name. And, he gave them a tip and all that. But that, again, his family was so poor before they got to Memphis that the Black sharecroppers in Mississippi took care of his family. You see what I'm talking about? Culture. He understood that culture. He and so the idea of what have you been exposed to? And if you haven't been exposed, then you learn. I learned about Diwali. I've been learning about Ramadan. I didn't know anything about those things. I never knew. And so I'm putting myself out there saying, I want to learn about this. And now we all got our little magic phones and we can learn about anything that we want to. But that is why we cannot keep children from reading certain books and reading certain plays and having conversations. I had an opportunity with the Delta Leadership Group when we were training. We went to Monroeville, Alabama, which is the home of Harper Lee, and saw a production of To Kill a Mockingbird. And it started outside, and we actually went into the courthouse that she envisioned in the book. It's a real courthouse where they actually had the trial, and people in the audience were actually part of the play. Now, you talk about, you say, I can get up and talk in front of anybody. Think about getting up in front of talking to people from 7 southern states after they've seen To Kill a Mockingbird and we're in the courthouse where the trial took place. And then you got to stand up and talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. It was such an experience, just such an experience. I learn more than I teach. I get more than I give. And just to be there in Monroeville and to go to places that Harper Lee went to, and they've got a little museum set up. We actually went to her grave, and I had seen the movie, but to see that play and to really think about it, because don't forget, I knew I had to get up and talk after all of this. I was like, oh, and it was a very diverse group. You had to apply to be in the Delta Leadership Institute from 7 or 8 states. And, that thing touches people in different ways. So that was quite an interesting experience, but I will never forget. I also have been fortunate enough to stand on the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma. Not because I went there as a pilgrimage. It was work. I was Delta Leadership Institute. And they closed the bridge for us to stand there. And I thought to myself, they closed the bridge to protect us. On that bloody Sunday, they closed the bridge to destroy those people. And that just got me. That there were police officers, and some police officers of color, women police officers, white police, they were protecting us on the bridge from the traffic, basically. But that all those years ago, they were trying to destroy the people on the bridge. So these are the type of experiences. Again, my family was not we didn't march. My family was not involved. They had voter registration things, stuff like that, but we didn't. I heard about it, of course, but some of the experiences I have had basically within the last 15 years have helped me to really understand. And I got to meet the last organizer who was still alive, who actually brought Dr. King to Selma. He had to be like 90 some years old. And you just sit at the feet of the masters and listen. And then there were 2 women who were teenage girls who were on that bridge, and they were close to my age. So I realized that some of the experiences that young people had who were my age, I didn't have those experiences. But they talked about how they would sit at Brown Church and they would be taught what to do, and they were taught nonviolence, and they were taught how to respond and what to do, and all of those types of things. And it's just, I've had some wonderful opportunities in my life, and I'm so grateful for them.
Vicki, how can a person stay a student? Because I think a lot of times people, the greatness that you have in you, and you'll even shun it. Like when I've complimented you when we were here in Carlsbad, when I compliment you, you're always like, you're always stiff arming me. Like you get it on someone else, push it away, all this stuff. But when you have greatness like you have through your experience and becoming a true master at what you do, and honestly, I could say this, and I've got a chance to be around it. I believe in the space where you're at, you're the best at what you do, the absolute best at what you do. But how can you stay a student? Because a lot of times you get to that point and you're like, okay, cool. I'm the master. Like I got this. And now you need to fall in line. We've seen this with history, right? We've seen this with history. I just watched the movie Air about Jordan.
I haven't
and,
seen it yet.
And Phil Knight, I won't ruin the whole thing for you, but there was times where Phil Knight was like, we're a publicly traded company. We need to act like this, make our shareholders happy. And the guy asked him the question, how did you build Nike in the first place? And a lot of times people lose that scrap once they get to the top of the mountain. But it seems like even though you got to the top of the mountain in what you do, you continually, voluntarily go into the valleys to spend time with the people. How is that?
I guess because I never think of getting to the top of the mountain, because, and it's not that I'm, so demure and all that. Nobody would ever use the word demure, but I am humble, and I'm always seeking to learn. Like I said, I'm working on the pronouns. I'm working on my indigenous cultural competence. My business partner is teaching me so much about the Hispanic community, and we're seeing all of these parallels. She is very fair and has very long, straight hair. When I see pictures of her family, who I have never met, and she says that the way people would talk to her, even as a child, was very different than the way people would talk to her family members because of the way they looked. So when you talk and you're exposed, but you have to keep wanting to learn. So the other day, as mad as I was about all that stuff in Nashville, I sat there and watched that television, and I thought, so this is how that works. So now I know more about how my own state house works. I've been there. I visited there, but now it was almost like, you ever heard the story? They say if you go in the kitchen and there's roaches in there, when you turn the light on, all the roaches scatter. That's what happened the other day. They turned the light on it, and the roaches didn't scatter. They just stood there and did stupid stuff. But you learn. I'm like, oh, so the Speaker of the House determines who speaks. I didn't know that. I took civics. But I also was not told about the Trail of Tears. Because when I took Tennessee history, they lifted Andrew Jackson up because that's the way the book was written. I didn't know anything about the Trail of Tears when I took Tennessee history in the 8th grade. I know now. And so this, so you just have to keep searching and reading and looking. And I like to have as much fun. You know me. I like to have fun. I'm not always sitting pouring through deep books. I hate deep books. I don't, that's not my thing. Years ago in those years, I was always going to those deep movies like Amistad and Schindler's List and all that. I love SpongeBob. I love SpongeBob. I love the Trolls. I love all of that little stuff. So it's not like I'm this very deep person. I have as much fun as anybody else, but I always want to learn something and I always want to figure something out. And when things, I see them, it's thrown in my face. And don't get me wrong, I was upset the other day, but I thought, so this is how this works. And I thought, people need to get more into the whole state legislature stuff. And then the whole idea about gerrymandering. I knew what that word meant. I thought I understood it, but it came home to me the other day. It came home to me because all of those systems were taking my little voice away in my state capital. I didn't know when I was little that we could only go to the zoo on Thursday. I knew we could only go to the zoo on Thursdays, but I didn't realize that my parents' tax money went to fund the zoo. I didn't understand that then. We could only go to the zoo on Thursday. So if you didn't go on Thursday, you couldn't go. And a very good friend of mine said that his father, he never went to the zoo because his father said, we're not doing this. Again, every family had their own threshold.
Yes.
For where they were, for the cutoff. Enough is enough is enough. So you learn, and then when all the Confederate, not all, we still have lots of them, the Confederate statues were coming down. I realized that almost every day going down a major street, I was passing a statue of Nathan Bedford Forrest, who helped found the Ku Klux Klan. Oh, yeah. And then when they took the statue down, and the idea is, that's in a public park. I pay for that park. My family's lived in Memphis with three generations. They paid for that land. And it's funny how this stuff comes to you, but you have to be willing to look at it. from a different point of view. And so much is being revealed. It's always been there, but we have to look for it.
What about the people, Vicki, that say, like, I'm going to use the comparison of politics. Sometimes people look at politics and they're like, you know what, it's just such a large bag. It's never going to change. I just need to live my life and I need to do it. I think a lot of times people feel that way in organizations and companies. How can you help people? Because you do this all the time, but how are you so masterful with helping people to realize no matter what size their voice is, that their voice actually counts and can make a difference in the organization, the company, the city, the state, and even the country that they live in?
Well, first of all, they have to believe it. They have to believe that their voice counts. The other thing is to be able to, and many people don't agree with me, and that's fine, but to offer whatever you have in a way that does not alienate people. Now, some people say, oh no, it's time out for that. It's time to go all in your face, but all that does is make people retreat and pull away from it. But everybody has a voice, but we also all have decisions to make. I really wish someone would write about the boomer generation of Black males who were hired into large companies. My ex-husband, very good friend of mine, who we grew up together, and they were put into these large companies. And now I realize it was trauma every day. While everybody was going, oh, wow, he has this great job and he's this and he's that. And again, I had some of it where I worked. But in retrospect, there would be something very interesting because their pressure was so much more, just so much more. And they didn't have a voice. And don't forget, all of our people were saying to them, you've opened the door, so you can't mess up. Again, because if you mess up, there's something called confirmation bias. And confirmation bias says that if somebody does something that you have a bias toward, it reinforces that bias. So if a young person with a hoodie takes somebody's pocketbook, you go back to all young boys of color with a hoodie are scary and they're thieves, because that confirms what you see on the news every day. That confirms. If a very young person, whether they're a person of color or not, quits a job after 6 months, your confirmation bias of boomers says they're not serious. You can't trust them to stay on a job. See, that's confirmation bias. That's confirming a bias that I already have. And so the idea of making sure that people have to confront their own confirmation bias, but it was hard. Now I realize the toll that it took on me. I can't even think about what it took on the men. And let me tell you something about boomer men, especially boomer Black men. And I don't know them all, so I don't want to speak to them. They were quiet, many of them. Some of them were not. But again, they knew their place. And see, that was the message in Nashville the other day. We're going to teach you your place. We're going to teach you your place. And Gloria Johnson, the 60-year-old white woman from Knoxville, she said it. She said this was about putting them in their place. And so I can't imagine what it was like to work in these big companies all those years and what it did to these folks inside, what it did to their families. I know what it did to my family. They didn't have anywhere to put it. They didn't talk to anybody. They didn't see, who could they talk to? And having to be on and perfect all the time and never making a mistake. And I just, and you see in some of the folks who are our age, you go, okay, that's what was going on. That's why he did this. So that's why he started drinking, or that's why and it's not an excuse. It's understanding what it's like to be in that pressure cooker. And then to have the whole world saying, you should be so happy. You got a job that nobody who ever looked like you had before. Whereas again, I think about that a lot. And it's troubling. I know it happened to me, but I don't think I was as affected as Black males were.
Now, The two words that you said earlier, which was diversity and inclusion, a lot of times people go, and you were talking about the confirmation biases, right? And
Mm-hmm.
with those two words, a lot of times when a person hears diversity and they hear inclusion, they instantly think that it's a black and white thing.
Mm-hmm.
But with diversity and inclusion, and from what I've heard from you, not only today, but when I've got a chance to be, I've been honored enough to be able to hear you speak in person and virtually, you're actually connecting the dots, the whole gambit, saying, you know, diversity and inclusion is about the fact that you grew up in a different household. Even if you're an African-American woman too, you grew up in a different household, which is diversity. And I've got to make sure that you feel included, even though you look very similar to me. We didn't grow up in the same house. We didn't grow up in the same city. We didn't grow up in the same. How can you help to be able to like make that more palatable? Because I think, again, right when people hear diversity and inclusion, that's where their mind goes to. How are you
It
able
goes to race.
to train that?
I think you help them to understand how many layers there are. That's why you talk about colorism. That's why you talk about elitism. That's why you talk about classism. That's why you talk about different sides of town and those types of things. Again, I just told you how wonderful my high school was, but there was a counselor there there was some citywide thing that was coming up. And at that time, they were just allowing Negro teenagers in these citywide things, if you would. And there was something that I was up to be in, and that I guess I deserved to be in, but she didn't, because she was a very classist person. She was a Black woman. She was a very classist person. She said her daddy works at a factory. We need to get one of the doctor's kids, the Black doctor's kids or the Black lawyer's kids. Well, my mama heard about it.
Mm.
And you know where it went. But I'm telling you, this is I'm looking at it now from an age standpoint. People like to pat older people on the shoulder and ask, oh, would you like something in print? No. Don't assume that because I'm the age that I am, and so ageism, body shaming, colorism, classism, accents, hair. Oh my gosh. Height. It is so common, whether you in the military or not, and especially in certain parts of the country. What faith do you have, or what church do you go to, or what religion? You don't have to. But the wheel is so complicated. But you have to see it from all of those dimensions. And now that I'm going to physical therapy, if I could create the world that would work for me, everybody would be left-handed. There would be no stairs. I could watch Turner Classic Movies and SpongeBob and them all day long, maybe a little bit Law and Order, and that would be a pretty good world for me. That won't work for most people. That's not going to work for most people. There are people who are shy. There are people who, like you and I, we love to talk. I don't think people walk up and say, oh, I could never get up and speak in front of people. And I don't go, oh, it's nothing. No, their reality is their reality. I try to encourage people, but I don't like, oh, poo-poo, anybody can do that. No, because there's so much that I can't do. There's so much that I can't do. I told you about the left-handed. Back in the day, all the girls had to take home economics. Well, I sucked at home economics because at that time, sewing machines didn't have swing arms. Don't forget, I'm left-handed. This is in my school that I just told you how wonderful it was. And the home economics teacher, first of all, there were no left-handed scissors. And so my pattern, when I cut it out, it looked like rats had been sucking on it. It was bad. We were supposed to be making these shift dresses, and mine, it literally looked like rats had been sucking on it. And she would hold it up to the other girls and say, look, this is not what we want. This is not what we want. And then when everybody else was pushing material through, mine was coming out. I'm left-handed. And she would stand over me and go, you're going to fail this class. You're going to fail this class. And I said, I'm trying. I'm doing the best I can. She was not trying to make any accommodation. And maybe she didn't know how to make accommodation. Don't get me wrong. When penmanship, all the circle people were teaching circles, they were going that way. My circles go that way. So they did not know. They allowed me to be left-handed. That's the first step. My grandmother, they did not allow to be left-handed. She said they tied her hand behind her back. And if she ever got it loose, they would hit it with a paddle. So they messed with her brain, because now we know left and right-handed has to do with your brain. So they forced her to be right-handed. They didn't force me, but there was no accommodation. So I came home crying, and my mother's like, what's wrong with you? She only asked you twice. If she asked you 3 times, you're in trouble. What's wrong with you? Nothing. What's wrong with you? All right, what's the deal? I'm going to fail home economics. What do you mean you're going to fail home economics? Miss whatever name is says, and my pattern looks bad, and I can't get my stuff to work and all that. So she came over to the school. She tried to talk to Miss Thing. And the woman goes, I just don't know what to say. She's going to fail. She's going to fail. And she has to take home economics. Well, she got her little group together, and they looked through the charter of the schools. There was nothing written that said girls had to take home economics. It was cultural for that time. And she went to the principal and she said, I want her out of there. And he said, she has to take home economics. All the girls do. She had all her papers. Show me. It was cultural. So I said goodbye. I took my little grubby pattern and I got in speech and drama. So the whole idea of being able to understand what's real and what's not real, and just because somebody says, that's what my mom was. You know, they looked it up. They went through everything, and there was nothing written that said girls had to take home economics. And I didn't realize that teacher, and because I never learned how to sew, it helped chart the course of my life. You only realize that when you get old and you look back. By getting in speech and drama, it put me on a path. You know, but no, there was no accommodation. She didn't care. And she was taunting me. You don't fail this class. You're going to fail this class. I'd never failed a class in my life. You know, and she was making a mockery of me, holding up my little ratty looking dress. And you really, again, viewing the world through other people's eyes. You got to view the world through other people's eyes. And let me tell you something. This is not about charity. This is not about feeling sorry for people. This is about justice and respect. Because so many people go the charity route. I feel sorry for them. I'm going to do this for them. And don't get me wrong, we're always going to need what they call direct service. People are always going to need food. They're always going to need clothing. They're always going to need shelter. But we got to go a little bit deeper and get a little bit involved, whether it's the way we vote or the way we learn or the way we talk about some things, you know. So it's not feel sorry for those little people over there, because there but the grace of God go I. But what we're moving from, and I always talk about this, from a charity mentality to a justice mentality. And when talking to volunteer groups, now, you know, I talk to a lot of associations and membership groups, and they say to me, well, Vicki, what are we going to do different if we move from the charity mentality? I said, nothing. You're going to think about it differently. You're going to do the same thing. I happen to be on the board of an organization that I'm so proud of called the National Diaper Bank Network. Now, I started off as a speaker. Like I said, I stumbled into a bunch of stuff. And I was sitting at the table, and Kelly, you know, all these conferences, they give you these goodie bags with all this good stuff in it. Well, this had it looked like a big giant safety pin. I didn't know what it was. It was industrial, and and I'm sitting next to some people, and they were people who were actually in this work. And I said, what is this? And she said, oh, somebody developed that. And I said, what does it do? And she said to me, on the weekend, people put T-shirts on their babies because they cannot afford diapers. And there was nothing that was strong enough to gather up the material and actually hook the wrapped T-shirt around the baby's bottom. So somebody crafted this big, giant, industrial looking safety pin that would cut through layers of material. See, I learned as much. I wasn't there to speak about board development. And I thought, wait a minute, because I had kids, I had diapers for my kids. I said, wait a minute. Well, why do they do that? And lady said, because when you go to work or school, kids go to daycare, you have to take so many diapers. Yeah. So they do the t-shirts because you can get a bag of t-shirts at Goodwill or Salvation Army, or everybody's got old t-shirts around. And that's what they put on the weekend to save the diapers. So I thought, I'm hooked. I want to learn more about this. And I started learning, and I realized that people like me were trolling these folks, the Diaper Bank, National Diaper Bank Network online, older women. These girls don't want to wash diapers. They're lazy. They just want to use plastic diapers. What I learned is you cannot take cloth diapers to a daycare center. It's against the law. You also cannot wash cloth diapers in a public washateria or a laundromat. So see, I'm speaking from my privilege because I got a wash and dryer sitting right there. So if I'm an old lady and I wash diapers, I'm ragging on all these younger moms because they don't want to wash diapers. That's not it. It's not it. There's a reason for this. And I didn't know about this stuff. And I've learned about it. I've actually gone to Washington and lobbied around this. And I'm learning. I've been with them about 10 years between a speaker and a volunteer and a board member. Now, again, I'm never going to have a diaper drive. I can tell you that. But I'm going to do what I can to talk about it. I'm telling all your folks about the National Diaper Bank Network. But that's what I do. But I didn't know anything about this. And Joanne Goldblum, who's the founder, is an amazing woman. She has written a book. She is serious about this. And now there are diaper banks and period supply programs all over this country. You say period supplies? Yeah, there are women who don't have period supplies. They can't go to work. There are girls who don't have period supplies. They can't go to school. Or they have accidents and they're bullied. So these are some of the small things that we can do. And to help people understand, and I said, okay, so I got to answer all these old women who saying these girls don't want to wash diapers. And Joanne was like, yeah, I think you're the one to explain. Because, I wash diapers. To be honest, somebody gave me diaper service for 3 months, but I wash diapers. But the idea of helping to educate people about the other people's reality. If you've always had a wash and dryer, that's where you go. These young girls don't want to, wash diapers and they're lazy, but that's not the truth. Women have family members have lost jobs because they could not, even if they had a voucher for daycare, even if they were supposed to go to school, if they didn't have those diapers. And when you think about it, do you want buckets of water with dirty diapers sitting around at a daycare center? I don't think so. So this learning, Joanne had me talk to my state rep, my U.S. House rep, Steve Cohen, who is amazing, because there was some talk about including diapers in Women, Infant, and Children program and SNAP, which used to be called the food stamp program. The first thought you think, oh, yay! No, they're not going to increase the allocation at the federal level. So now I've got the same amount of money, but now I got to include diapers and period supplies. I just did this 6 weeks ago. She said, we need you to understand and get on the phone with somebody in Steve Cohen's office, and the staff person was on it with me. I thought, oh, that's why that's not a good idea. She said, no, unless they're willing to up the allocation, because if a family gets $100 worth of SNAP benefits for food, and now you got diapers included in that, you're cannibalizing. I was like, wow. So I think the other thing is to not sit in judgment, to not to not sit in judgment. I don't know what path you've traveled. I don't know what you're dealing with. Your journey is not my journey. And we just need to be open. We also need to stop being defensive. And that I went through it and I did this and I did that. And why do they have to? Why would you want life to be hard for people younger than you? You know, suffering is overrated. And there are many people my age who are like, well, I did it. I walked to school in the snow and please, get over yourself. The idea is that we're supposed to, in our way, try to make the world a little bit better, but it happens on a one-to-one basis. No, there are some people who are going to do great things. Great things like the two Justins and Gloria Johnson. They're going to change a whole lot. But then there are those others of us who do the type of stuff you and I do. We talk to people. We help people to look at things from a different point of view, or we put things on people's minds, and we share our own scars. And when you talked about the hair, going back to my mom, some people out there don't know what a half slip is. It's something that a woman used to wear under her dress so that when she stood in the sunlight, but now everybody took all the slips off and stand in the sunlight. I'm not mad at them, but I remember getting my mother's half slip and it had elastic and I put it on my head and I stood in front of the mirror and I did that. Because all the hair I saw on TV moved and all the good hair moved. Well, first of all, the woman snatched the thing off my head. She was a sneak attack person. She came up behind me and snatched it off my head. I wasn't injured. And then I had to hear about, why are you touching my things? You're not supposed to touch my things. And about how long she had to work to be able to pay for that half slip. That was her usual. And then she would sit down and she said, what were you doing? And see, my mom had wavy hair, so her hair kind of moved. And I said, I wanted to see what it felt like to have good hair. And she said, you have good hair. And I said, no, I don't. My hair won't move. Good hair moves. And she said, good hair is the hair God gave you. And it's good for you. And you don't need anybody else's hair. I was like, oh. But see, that's not what the world was telling, the imagery. You're talking about being in the, in the business of the way hair should look and the way it should move. And, we had that, and I said to her, well, your hair moves. And she said, you have different hair than I do. Same reason that my skin was lighter and that my eyes were lighter and that she was short and I was tall and that I'm left-handed and she was right-handed and that she wrote beautifully and I could barely print, but we're different. We're the same. I'm her child, but we're very different. But I loved it when she said to me, good hair is the hair God gave you. And don't touch my slip again. Don't forget that. So it's just that being able to see things from another and to fight your confirmation bias. Kelly, I have had my heart beat sitting on a parking lot when I see young males cutting across a parking lot of a restaurant. I have 2 sons, adult sons. They're built like me. They're not little skinny people. And I have a grandson. If somebody did that to them, I would go ballistic. But because of what I see all the time, and that, be careful. This one did this. This one did that. I had to put myself in check. I'm not proud of that, to say this out loud. I'm not proud to say that. My heart was beating fast. And I said, you need to put yourself in check. Because if somebody did that to your son, your grandson, anybody you would be all over them. And that, again, this is that confirmation bias, because the world is telling me, even though I know people who look like this, I've birthed people who look like this, that these are dangerous people. And I had to put myself in check. I'm putting that out there in the universe. If it's hard for me sometimes, then the other thing I thought of, the boy weighed 100 pounds. I could have taken him, The boy was not paying any attention to me. I'm sitting on the parking lot waiting for somebody to bring out food. He cut across the parking lot. He was minding his business. But because of the imagery and because of what we see, and I'm not saying that people don't do things. I'm not, but you have to put yourself in check. Why am I assuming that this person is going to hurt me? Now, did I open my car door and throw my purse out? No, but I wouldn't do that for anybody. But that's what I mean. You have to work on yourself. I'm not proud to tell this story, but it's real. And if it's real for me, imagine how real it is for somebody who's never met a young black male, or who's never been in the company of people of other races, or people who identify as gay or trans, or all of those types of things, or people who've come from other, it just, if I felt like that, I can't imagine what that feels like.
So, Vicki, what about the person who, when you were talking about it earlier, you were saying that, from all different walks of life, you have to be open to it, and you have to want to learn. You stay light on your feet, and the reason why I say this is because, like, when I'm around Vicki, I've never seen Vicki not being Vicki. Like, you're just, and everybody loves Vicki, and when everyone leaves, not only do they love your content and love who you are, but they also are like, I've heard people say to me, I wish I could be like Vicki. And I'm thinking there's so many different facets to that in my mind that go through. And then they follow it up with, she's able to be herself in every single environment. And so that's what I mean by staying light on your feet. Talk to the person out there that when they heard you say, you need to understand where all these people are coming from, if they're gay, if they're trans, if they're black, if they're white, if they're Hispanic, and they're thinking, Vicki, you just added so much to my life. How am I going to be able to do that? That's so much energy. I'm going to be tired at the end of the day. But when I look at you, you stay light. How can you do these things? How can a person do these things and stay light and not have it overwhelm them?
It can be overwhelming. I will admit to you that watching everything that was going on in Nashville was overwhelming to me. It overwhelmed me. What happened to Mr. George Floyd, it overwhelmed me. But it's like, how am I going to use this? How am I going to use this? And the idea, use it for good, not use it to start screaming at people and all of that. The other thing is, for so long, when I was in corporate America, I realized that I wasn't being authentic. I wasn't being myself, probably for about a week on the job. And then I just was like, okay, this is who I am. And I think that came so much from my mom. You have to be you, and it has to be enough. And, don't get me wrong, I carried it. I worked at a major defense company outside of Chicago for many years. I was the first African-American person, and believe it or not, I think I was only 26 years old, and I was in human resources. This is a giant plant. I don't know what they made. I don't want to know what they made. And so here I am. Technically, now I was a girl, and everybody in management there, they were retired military. They were men. They were white. So to go to somebody like that and say, this person has asked for a promotion. They qualify. What's the issue? We had all these rules and regulations and everything. And I thought to myself, that was, now in the back, in the retrospect, I'm like, oh my God, that was so gutsy, But the other thing we have to have is mentors and allies. And the vice president of human resources at that time, he was an amazing man. So the guys came in there saying, I want you to keep your girl off my manufacturing floor. And they were talking loud. This wasn't offices. We had cubicles. I could hear everything. I don't want her out there telling them that they can get, because a lot of the wirers and solderers had been bussed in from inner city Chicago. And she's out there telling them they can get promoted. She's out there telling them they can go to school. You need to keep your girl off my manufacturing floor. He was so amazing. He said, my girl. Now, I have a daughter, but she lives in Ohio. I don't think you're talking about her, are you, Bob? You know who I'm talking about. That girl that comes out there talking to people about promotions and educational stipends. My girl. And you say this is your manufacturing floor. He started looking through books. So wait, the manufacturing floor and the people on it, you own them. Well, I didn't say that. That's what you said. He goes, I think you're talking about, and again, I was a girl. I think you're talking about Mrs. Clark. And he had me come in and he said to them, okay, if we've got this problem, she's doing her job. Well, she told her wire and solder, and at that time, and I know people won't believe it, the pay scale for wire and solder is like $4.20 an hour. And if somebody wanted to be a wire and solderer too, they go to $4.40 an hour. And she told my best wire and solderer one that they could go to wire and solder two. And then does she know that the defense of this company, this country, is in jeopardy? And he said, if the defense of this country is held together by a wire and solder one that makes $4.20 an hour, we might as well close this whole damn place down. And he said, now let's go around to the general manager and let's have this go, no, we don't have to go out, we don't need to do all that. But he stood up, for me. I just stood there going like, and the classism kicked in. Technicians who had gone back, mostly at that time, young white males who had gone back to school to take engineering classes, they were eligible to be promoted to associate engineer. Oh, no. No, no, no. They're technicians. They're not engineers. I mean, I saw this. It was unbelievable. And this would have been in the late 70s because I left there in 82. But I didn't realize what kind of water I was in. I went there to do their internal newsletter. Okay, that's what I did. But then they started the Human Resources Internal Promotions and Education Program. And, starting to train supervisors and stuff. They didn't want to hear nothing I had to say. I mean, I was young enough to be most of their daughters, some of their granddaughters. And they were all military. Because that's how you got those jobs in defense contractors back then. But I learned a lot. But I have had some good allies. I have had some good mentors. And I loved it when he said, now, if you really feel this strongly, let's walk around to the general manager's office. Come on, we all go. Let's all walk together. And you go and tell Mr. Solberg about your manufacturing flow and my girl and the $4.20 wire and solder holding the entire defense of this country together. And let's see what he says. Because this internal promotions program and education program is part of what he wants for this firm. Well, we don't have to do all that. But it's just crazy. I don't understand it. It was, when I think back on that and the guts that I would have just walking around talking to people, explaining these systems, but that's what I was supposed to do. And to tell somebody that you can't fire somebody, they have to have a verbal warning, they have to have a written warning, and they have to have a sit down with somebody from Human Resources. They weren't used to that. They could just go pluck you on the shoulder and go, you done. It was, when I think about where companies have come from, with progressive discipline and corrective action and all of that, I guess I was at the beginning of that in a very hierarchical, male-dominated, militaristic environment in a defense contract. Oh, and if we lose our contract, and he said, we're going to lose our contract because we moved one wire and solder? We could. It's like, no, we won't. It was, I think back on that and I was like, you really? I don't know where. I think I got it from my mom. And I didn't do it with arrogance.
Yeah.
I didn't do it for, I like people. And let me say this, there were Black people who were suspect of me because I was the first Black person in human resources and I was young and I wasn't from the South Side of Chicago. So I was running interference on all levels.
How important is it, Vicki, when you've touched on the subject a couple of times, and which is you've used the word ally, and my friend Will, who is my best friend in the world, he said to me the other day, and it was quick, but he said real change won't happen until people that look like you. And this is strange to hear from him because we grew up together. We grew up in the same houses. My mom raised him. His mom raised me. But when he said that, he said, some of the things that I experience won't change until a person who looks like you speaks up. Can you talk about the impact and power of allies and how people can truly become allies as opposed to just the lip service that we saw after George Floyd? Because we did see it, and I remember talking with my friends, and I had close conversations this way. Obviously, this isn't a close conversation, but I remember
Right.
I remember saying to my friends, and we had come from a very diverse group of friends. I was like, I'm just interested with all these companies when the dust settles, if they continue on, and most of them didn't. Everyone had, got a poster child that didn't look like everybody. Everyone did it. And I was like, but I don't believe this stuff because it's surface. How can a person become an ally, but to truly become an ally as opposed to the lip service part?
Well, to truly become an ally, you have to first want to be an ally.
Okay.
You have to want to, which means you have to learn. Allies, I have to understand young people to be an ally for young people. I don't criticize them, even though I'm old enough to be their grandmother at this point now. But the idea is I have to really kind of understand their point of view and be willing to learn. I have as much to learn from a Gen Z person as they have to learn from me, because allies have to be willing to learn. So being on the planet longer doesn't make me any smarter, because I don't know what it's like to be 17, 18, 22 years old in 2023. So first of all, I got to learn from them, and I got to listen to them. And then I have to talk to my networks, just like I talked to the ladies who wrote all the little nasty stuff in about the diapers, to people in my sphere to help them to understand, because they may hear it from me. Gloria Johnson is the biggest ally for the two Justins. She's a white woman. She is 60. And let me explain to you how Tennessee is set up. She is from East Tennessee. East Tennessee rules. They rule. Knoxville rules. Nashville leads. And we just hanging down here on the end. So there's all this sectionalism in this state. And I think most states have that. But the fact that when Justin walked through that door yesterday, arm in arm with Gloria Johnson, and she walked him to his seat. She wasn't hiding in the back, like, oh, I'm so glad they didn't expel me. I didn't have to go. She met him outside that door. She walked him into that chamber. They held hands together, and she walked him to his seat in front of all of those who had just voted him out. That's what an ally does. Now, will many of us have that kind of an opportunity? Probably not. But we need to be able to, like you say, amongst our friends, say, do you really think all the young women are lazy? Do you really think, all the Hispanic people are, that they just want to come over here and take jobs? Whatever this is that people believe, or they've been told, or they read on some crazy website, it's like, do you really believe that? And what makes you believe that? And have you ever thought about it from this standpoint? Have you ever thought about it from that standpoint? And it's not a one-off conversation. And you share articles and you share stuff. And you started off talking about seeds. And you just keep it going. Some people will come through and some people will not. I have friends who say these pronouns, I don't get it. I don't understand it. I'm like, who are we to take away somebody's identity or to disrespect somebody's identity? They are who they say they are. It used to be that's why we don't talk about We don't talk about equality anymore, Kelly. We talk about equity. Equality means we all get the same thing. We don't all need the same thing. We need different things. The golden rule says treat people like you want to be treated. The platinum rule says treat people like they need to be treated and that they want to be treated. And so now what's happening is there are some people who equality, if I'm tall, and everybody's seen this little graphic, and I'm looking over a fence, I don't need a box. But equality says that we all got a box. So you got a tall woman standing up. I'm on a box. I can already see over the fence. Middle-sized person, they get one box. They can barely see over the fence. Person on the end, little bitty, they can't see over the fence. Person in a wheelchair, they can't even get up on the box, but they got a box. That's equality. We're going to give everybody a box. All God's children got a box. Hallelujah. Okay, well, that don't work. The tall boy or woman never needed a box. He could always see over the fence. The middle-sized person needed 2 boxes. The short person needed 3 boxes. The person in the wheelchair needed a ramp. They all needed something different. But now when you go and take that box from that tall boy, he is being disenfranchised. Dude, you never needed the box. You could always see. Oh, but you took my box from me. You didn't need the box. And if you think of the fence as life, I can't get in the game. If the fence is, I'm watching a baseball game. I can't get in the game if I can't see over the fence. So yeah, some people need to lose a few boxes, but it'd be so lovely if they just give their boxes away and not see that as you're taking something from me that I deserve. I made this box with my own hands. Great. It's even better now. A handmade box to the person on the end. Custom. And you made it from your heart. But I made it for myself. You don't need the box. And this is happening everywhere. You know, men in corporate America now are taking family leave. But the culture still says, you know, some of the companies I've worked with, we've talked about this. And this one young man, white man, he said, when I took 6 weeks off, when my baby was born, you should have heard the conversation amongst his peers. You know, are you on the mommy track? You know, again, all this disparaging stuff. This is white men to white men. And then he turned down a promotion because it was going to require him to travel. And he had a young family, and that was his choice. And they said to him, not corporate people, his buddies, you know you're never going to get promoted. You know you're never going to get promoted. You've killed yourself here. You see, that's that culture. And so they were looking down on him and trying to make him feel bad about the decisions he would make. That's why I'm so proud of the younger people who are making decisions based on the quality of the types of lives they want. Money is important, don't get me wrong, but that's not everything for them. They understand that there are other things that are important. And I think COVID taught us that because life is so fragile. And we've all stayed, I mean, anybody my age, we stayed on some crazy toxic jobs that made us, you know. But this young man, and he told this in a corporate setting with I'm sure some of the taunters sitting around. And he said, that's my choice. If I don't get promoted, I don't get promoted. I made the choice, but this is my choice. And I'm proud of it.
Everybody that can hear your voice or see your face right now understands why I say that you're the best. And when you look at it, the consistency, the congruency through the whole entire message, I mean, and it's incredible because a lot of times you can scratch the surface on somebody, and you can scratch the surface and be like, oh, it was hard wood, but you know, I scratched the surface and it ain't hard wood down below. But as deep as, and I told you this before we started, like, you know, the more and more layers that I peel back with Vicki Clark, the better and better it gets. And because of the consistency and because of the ease of who you are, and you allow people to be themselves. That's what I just realized right now is I've been trying to understand your magnetism. I've been trying to understand your greatness. I've been trying to understand that, but I not that I fully understand, but you truly allow, no matter who the person is, where they're from, what their identity is, anything like that, you allow them to be themselves completely 100%. And that is just an amazing thing. Vicki, I started the podcast because of my kids, Maddox and McKenna. And you didn't get the chance to meet them at Servant Leadership Institute.
But I see them on your social media.
Yes. And Maddox is 11. He is just a joy of all joys. My daughter, McKenna, gives me as hard of a time as possible. She said to me the other day, well, she says to me every day, I say, you're the greatest. She's like, I know. I said, I love you, baby. And she says, who wouldn't? And then she generally leaves right after that. So she doesn't even say, I love you, Dad, anything like that.
How old is she?
14 years old.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. No, those are she's got the book. She knows the answers.
She knows.
There's a playbook for teenagers, especially teenage girls. Yeah.
So I made the podcast because of them, because I wanted to take iconic figures like yourself, and I wanted to show Maddox and McKenna that anything in the world was possible with the right attitude and the right work ethic. So what advice would you have for Maddox and McKenna? And if you could use both their names, it would be awesome.
Well, first of all, Maddox and McKenna, you have an amazing dad. You have an amazing mom. And you might not understand that right now, because I didn't understand what I had. You know, both my parents are gone now. I appreciate them and understand them more and more. I still talk to them. I'm not crazy. But the idea is to be yourselves, respect yourselves, and respect other people. And no matter how many times you get knocked down, get up. But don't be afraid to ask for help. You have to ask for help. This whole pull up by your bootstraps, all this stuff that we hear, we need help. We're communal animals. Human beings were meant to be together. So if I ask you for help, it doesn't mean I'm weak. That's the strongest thing I can do. So if I ask you for help, I ask you for advice, I look to you for guidance, and just to be authentically who they are. And do not compare yourself to anybody else. Because somebody has a job that makes more money or a bigger title than you or a bigger house than you. You got to figure out what you value and what your values are. And that takes a while. It takes a while. Because of course you all, when you're young, you want to be like everybody else, and that's important. But the idea of finding out who you are, and it is a discovery. I'm still doing it. My life, there's a poem that my life ain't been no crystal stair. I lost my first child. He died when he was 10 months old. I'm not bitter about a lot of the things that have happened in my life. I have regrets. I still got stuff to work on, and relationships with, family members and things like that. But I'm not giving up. And whatever you believe in, whatever faith, whatever you look to, lean to it. And that's what I would say to them, as well as to my own grandson. And everybody makes mistakes. You ain't got enough podcast sponsors for me to start telling you about all the mistakes I make. This would turn into the marathon telethon. I'm not sitting here like I've always done things wrong. Oh, I have goofed up so many times and messed up so many times. And no, it sets you back. But I don't know. I told you that I'm almost 2 years to the day from being diagnosed with colon cancer. Out of the blue, during COVID. What? I knew I was at the bottom of the gene pool because everybody in my family either had heart trouble or high blood pressure or what. We didn't have any cancer. So they wake you up from a colonoscopy and look you in the face and tell you that you have cancer. Okay. Wow. I didn't know how to process. The good news is a good friend, childhood friend, took me, to this procedure, and we rode home together, kind of pretty much in silence. And then I thought, okay, I got to deal with this. I don't know how. I don't know what I'm not going to ask why. And then you put your tools in place, looking for doctors and asking around and doing that and looking up stuff and trying to figure out what it is. But I had never, believe it or not, I was 70 years old and I had never had surgery in my life. When I had my tonsils out when I was 5. So when I fill out all the forms, people like, because they think old people crazy, excuse me, ma'am, you didn't list your surgeries. Up until 2 years ago, I had never had any surgeries. So that put me in a whole different category. I had never had any surgery. And I'm not going to say that having cancer hasn't changed the way I feel about myself, but I was blessed. I was blessed, incredibly blessed. I am well right now. I'm cancer free. I go to a zillion doctors, but I'm doing well. But I'm having to readjust to this stage of my life. You know, I mean, who planned on COVID? Who planned on cancer? We don't plan on any of this. And what comes to us, we have. Now I'm not going to tell you that I didn't feel like giving up. I made folders for everybody, and so that they would know all these things and all of that. But I didn't give up. And the fact that I'm back, I can't travel, but I'm working virtually, and I'm going to physical therapy. Talk about young people. The first group of physical therapists I had, the guy was saying, in order to strengthen your hips, you got to like tighten your butt muscles up. He's a young white guy. I love him, Jacob. He goes, see, Ms. Clark, you have to tighten your butt muscles. I said, Jacob, I don't twerk. I don't know how to twerk, because what you're describing sounds like twerking to me, about tightening your butt muscles up and lifting yourself up. I said, Jacob, I don't twerk. So don't ask me, and he just started laughing and cracking up. And he goes, and then later he said to me, you helped me. And I said, what do you mean? He said, because, as a physical therapist, I mean, they're very attuned, obviously, we're working with people who have issues and older people and stuff like that. He said, but it never occurred to me that I said, when I was a girl, you were taught to tuck your butt and stand up straight. You were not taught to stick your butt out. So he says, in order to get this leverage, you got to stick your butt out and tighten your muscles. Well, that ain't what they told us. You tuck your butt in and stand up straight. And he said, that was so helpful. He said, I can't tell you how many times I've worked. And he said, I don't mean no harm, but with older women. And when I say to them, stick your butt out, tighten your butt muscles up, they kind of look at me like they're crazy. He said, but none of them ever said, I don't twerk, don't ask me. And none of them ever said, we were taught to tuck our butts, not to stick them out. He said, that's why this is difficult. I said, yeah. So that's a generational thing.
Vicki,
so it's just, Jacob just laughed. And I said, I don't twerk, don't ask me. And then I started explaining how I said, I can't remember the time my mother has been like, stand up straight, tuck your butt. And he's talking about sticking it out and squeezing it and using it for leverage. I'm like, I don't understand that. And he said, that really helps me, because I wondered why that concept seemed so foreign to certain people. I was like, because they had mamas like mine. Slapping them on the butt, going, tuck your butt and stand up straight. Yeah.
Oh, Vicki, you were incredible. I do want to, I would love to have you on again.
Yay.
I would love to have you on again. I want to have
I'll
you on.
change my headband.
Hey,
I got on pajama pants and house shoes, but I did put my necklace and my earrings on for you. But I will change my headband when I come back.
We've got all your socials. We've got the website, everything like that for people to be able to contact you. But I tell you, if you have an organization out there, you have a company out there, and you don't have Vicki working with you, you're not reaching the full potential. And it's not just from. The cool thing is not just from the servant leadership part of it. It's not just from the inclusion or the diversity. It's the fact of the experience of the power that you give to people, Vicki. And I want to thank you for it. It is my absolute honor and pleasure. I told you I was going to force you to be my friend for the rest of your life when we first met, and you just can't get
I'm
away
an
from
only
me.
child. Nobody ever had to force me to be their friend. Only children will hang on to people like crazy. Most people have to shuck me like, enough, lady, enough. No.
Vicki, can you do this for me? You're looking into the screen right now. Can you give my friend Will some advice after going through, because that story that I told you about the statue it just happened. It just happened. I believe it was last week. And he sent me a picture of that statue, and it was bad.
Mm-hmm.
And can you give him maybe some wisdom from your experience?
First of all, Will, I would love to meet. You have one of the best friends, I imagine, growing up together. I applaud you for speaking up. I applaud you for speaking up. There are many people who would not, and they would have just ghosted these people. They just would have disappeared, and everybody would have been, what happened to Will? I don't know. Have you heard from him? I don't know. He didn't do that. He's trying, and he's putting himself out there. You're making yourself vulnerable, Will, by telling them and talking to them and all of that. And you should not have to purchase that. Y'all should destroy that together as part of their journey to understand why it is offensive to you. And whether they understand it or not, that's what real friends do. And I know it is a burden for anybody who has been othered to always have to teach people, always have to train people, always have to explain. It does. It gets heavy. But these are your friends. And I think if they are truly your friends, they will begin to see the value that you bring to them, because the lessons that you are teaching them, Will, are lessons they will take to their children, again, to their workplace, to the way they watch TV, to the things they say. This is invaluable. You don't get this out of a book. They're having a real close encounter with someone that they trust and someone that they love or feel close to. And it doesn't get any better than that. And they can trust you. You're not going to steer them wrong. And they have to understand who you really are. And if they can't understand that, then there are decisions that you have to make.
Vicki, better than advertised. You keep getting better and better and better and better all the time. And I want to thank you so much for being here with us. I want to thank you. I want to thank all of our sponsors. Check out the sponsors, guys. Click the links. You know what you need to do. Do the thing that you should be doing anyway. Subscribe on YouTube, because my son thinks I'm cool when you do. And thank you all for listening, for sharing, for watching, and to helping us to get into the top 1% globally. So, Vicki, you're amazing. You're absolutely phenomenal. Vicki Clark, everyone, you're officially off the hot seat.
For over